Great, so I'm Britt Barak. Came all the way from Tel Aviv, and we just came from Mountain View from the I/O actually, to share some thoughts about the news and the announcement that we were just watching. And we're very excited to be here with you, and thank you so much for coming. I think we're going to start just with introductions. So every one of you, please just let us know your name, where you're from, and what do you do for a living or for in your life as a passion.
I'm Angella Derington, and I'm currently based out of St. Louis, Missouri. However, I'm heading to Seattle in the next about 6 weeks, switching jobs to go to Dropbox. I've been developing Android apps since about 2012, and so there was something bittersweet when today they said that Gingerbread is no longer supported by the support library, since that was my first published OS. and so I'm most passionate about working on consumer-facing apps. I've mostly worked on retail. I've done some restaurant chains, that sort of thing, and I focus a lot on the user experience. So that's what I get passionate about.
Cool. My name's Nicolette. I am a pretty new Android developer. I've been working at Microsoft for the past almost 3 years. I joined our Yammer Android team about 6 months ago, and right now I am the technical lead for our support engineering team. So I was really excited by a lot of announcements for I/O, especially the support for Kotlin, which I can talk more about later. So right now, probably because I'm doing support engineering, I'm really passionate about getting our builds faster, making sure our quality's good, and making everybody's life easier, and especially our users.
Hi, I'm Stacy Devino. I currently am the tech lead for Alchemy Technologies for the mobile apps. It's a fintech company. You can always look up more information. And I've been doing Android since 1.6. I still have my original G1. It does work if I could find the charging cable. And I have done a mixture of embedded security, so embedded Linux, embedded Android security, and worked for retail companies. And so any kind of part of the operating system, feel free to let me talk to you about it, because I'll go on forever.
Hey, I'm Caren. I'm based in San Francisco, and I'm currently working at a company called June. And June is making a smart oven right now, which is built off. Oh, it's cool how I see some people nodding about it. But June is built off the Android ecosystem. So a lot of what I do is try to make people not think that we just put a phone in their ovens. So I work a lot with custom views and animations. So I was really excited when Google announced more support for like the Spring animations, and a lot makes things a lot easier. But yeah, Kotlin was also really cool.
Yeah, and we'll talk about everything in just a few minutes. So first of all, I'd like it really to be like a conversation as much as possible with all of you. So honestly, whenever you feel like you want to ask a question, just feel free to. The mic is not there, but just approach there, and we'll make it happen. So we can just have it as much of a conversation together with you, not just us talking, although we can't just talk on forever, we saw that. Just for me to know a little bit more of a context to this conversation, how many of you have been, went to I/O this time, this year? This year? And that's, yeah? Okay, great. And how much of you did you watch the keynote before? How many of you? The keynotes and the developers' keynotes? Amazing. And the what's new in Android? Amazing. So we had 3 keynotes that we had to watch, okay? It was nice, but we didn't have to leave the amphi, so it was okay. All right, so that's great. Let's just, to start off, let's talk about, everyone can say, just in a line, what were you most excited about on each one of the keynotes for us, just in a few lines, and why was that something that was exciting for you? What was this news? I mean, what did it? Why was this exciting news for you?
There you go. Excellent. So I actually was super excited about the architecture components. I've done a lot with SQLite, and if anyone has worked with it in the past, it can be kind of a bear, and it's somewhat fragile. And even wrapping it with something like SQLite, which is one of the Square libraries, can help and make it reactive. But just the persistent piece alone, Room, was enough to just get me so excited. And I was sitting in the talk, we were surrounded by other Android developers, and we're just all looking at each other. We're like, oh my gosh, where's this been all of our life? And then all the other components too. Now it escaped my name, or escaped me. What was the name of what's that?
Is it Kotlin?
No, the reactive piece where we could, the observer pattern. Yeah, the life cycles and all this sort of thing.
Data for the
live
component.
data. That was what I was going with. Live data looks amazing too. It reminds me a lot, if anyone's done a little bit of iOS, the ability for observing the property changes in iOS, which they've had forever. It reminds me of that, which should really clean up code bases a lot.
Well, like I said, I got excited and jumped the gun. I'm super excited about the introduction of support for Kotlin. So every week my team and I meet up, and during lunch we either read an article or watch a video about some new emerging trend. And last week or 2 weeks ago was my turn, and I picked an article about Kotlin versus Java. So I was like, oh, I picked something right. So we were really excited about that because we already started talking about introducing that even just in our unit tests, so that we're not increasing our app size. But for us, I think one of the big things is null safety, being able to get our crash count down just by having that feature. And another thing is I come from a C#. I started off in C#, obviously I work at Microsoft. So those features that I was kind of missing from C#, like function literals and extension methods, is just something cool that we would be able to integrate and not kind of have to wait on Java 8 support also.
So I'm right there, excuse me. So I'm right there with you on the live data. So I think I've implemented that same functionality 40 times now, in some way, shape, or form, always super custom to the particular way it's being used. But it's nice to have a standard and not have to come up with it again. But then also, and it didn't get a lot of play, but auto-resizing text and proper font support. Oh my God, downloadable fonts, and they built it into the support package. That Chet knows how to talk to you, doesn't he? So, I mean, these are things that have been just a consistent pain in the butt for every single person who's had to do an app at scale, especially if you have anything to do with design. And it's one of those features that every single application uses it. If you manage to have an app without text, congratulations. You have made Flappy Bird with no logo. But yeah, so it's really great, and especially for multi-language support, especially because some of those fonts that we see are really don't translate well, even with whatever design we might have. So auto-sizing is also very important. But yeah.
Yeah, so I think I mentioned a little bit before, but they announced support for physics-based animation, which I think is really cool because writing animation for Android is so difficult. You have to calculate the velocity and all these other stuff and translate everything, and then if you want to reverse the animation, you have to do all that over again, which makes things really messy, and it's very easy to get this kind of stuff wrong. So the fact that they came out with this library called physics-based, and the only thing there right now I think is velocity and spring. But I'm assuming they're going to come out with a lot more force and spring, yeah. So I'm assuming, and reverse, exactly, yeah. So I'm assuming they're going to come out with a lot more in that package, which makes it really easy to do a lot of the custom animations. Other than that, I think the support for fine-grained notification control sounds really exciting, just because it seems like something that iOS has been doing for a long time. So the fact that we can control what kind of notifications we now see on our phone seems really cool.
Amazing. So maybe let's go ahead and start talking about the architecture components, which is a really a big thing. Actually, I'm very excited that it is out. I was privileged enough to be one of the people who participated in the early access for it, and I'm like really really excited for it to be out, and soon we'll publish some blog posts about that. And all right, so there are a few things that that I mean this program is doing for us. So first of all, Google released now an opinionated guide for how would an ideal architecture for an Android app should look like. Maybe which are the best libraries that should be used. Is that something you find as a hit or a miss? Do you think this is something that can help developers, or that is like right now it's telling us, okay, use that, or you're doing something wrong? Do you find this something that is helpful?
So it's interesting, like several of us were talking about it after one of the talks,
right.
And really this exact same thing. And what we landed on was, one, the opinionated version. One I liked because it matched my architecture anyway. But but what I've noticed a lot is, especially if you're doing agency work or you're somebody who does a lot of startups, that sort of thing, you go from one team to the next and everybody has a different architecture. So it's like, well, I've been an Android developer for 7 years and I have no idea what's going on in this code base. And I'm hoping that something like this will at least make it easier for somebody to jump from different teams, to have that sense of continuity. It does seem like it is very opinionated, though, and it's definitely driving a particular architecture. But I was happy that they matched it all up with some good testing strategies. I also went to the testing talk earlier, or like the first thing this morning, and they released a lot around testing persistence, a lot of the things around SQLite that were like terrible to test before. They showed exactly how this architecture is going to get us to the point where we can have great coverage with fast, reliable tests, and that I think is very meaningful.
Cool. So I came at it from like 2 different perspectives. One of which is that my team just invested a lot of time like refactoring to MVP. And but on the other side of things, as someone who's a little bit like newer to the Android framework, what I liked was, I remember when I started out and I was following like the Get Started guide, I was like, okay, put everything in the main activity. And just like as a software engineer in general, I was like, that doesn't sound right, like putting everything in one class. But when you even get past that, like you can like look it up and obviously figure it out. But just having something like this for people who are new to the area and like kind of learning those best practices earlier on, rather than like correcting for like incorrect practices for a long time, I think is really helpful. I'm curious to hear what people who, again, are also like very opinionated about their architectures think. I think it's a really good guideline, and they did preface a lot of the things they said with like, use what's best for you and your application. But I'm curious, even from my teammates who worked on that refactor, to see like how they feel and if they agree or disagree or if want to make more changes.
So I think that we can all agree on certain things involving architecture for the most part, but I think what this really is, when they're saying, hey, you need to follow this architecture, is they're saying, hey, do this and you won't be screwed later when we introduce a new feature. And that's honestly what it is. If your code works and you have good things thus far, but your architecture does not match, what they have clearly outlined through some of the things with instant apps and some of the things that we're obviously seeing through the Google Assistant is that they have designed their tools, their integrations, they're moving forward based off of that architecture. And if they are telling you that this is what you need to do, then it's not I mean, we can say, yeah, it's nice to be able to walk into something that is relatively the same. What they're saying is, you do this, and you can instantly pull in all of our components. And that does need to standardize, because there is think about all of the build issues that we had in the earlier versions using Eclipse and Ant only and Android.makefiles. I became an expert in that for a little while. Gradle simplified a lot of that by dictating how we actually have to do our build system. So now having it be part of our architecture in terms of the actual application, then I'm more curious as to going forward what they actually will do in terms of modularization as part of the standardizing of the architecture, and whether or not they're actually going to, at a later date, enforce this. I mean, they say do what you want for now, but as we know, that can always change. So yeah, I'm not that negative normally, but.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to that. I'm just glad that Google finally told us like what we should be doing. I kind of like it when Google tells us what's the right way to do something.
Okay, do you think it's a much difference than you? All right, so you told us that it's like exact the same as your current architecture. Is this a situation for everyone, or?
You will see. Sorry.
Yeah.
So yes, it is what I've been following all along, because I was always looking at their internal applications as distributed as part of the operating system, because I always look at somebody else's code, see how they're doing it, and then maybe go, oh, well, I guess that's just the way. But there are a number of people who subscribe to the single God activity method and things like that. Well, they were also having, as I understand it, issues with getting started with instant apps, some of these larger organizations that were asked to do so. So yeah, you will see that there is these two contradicting models that are prevalent, and what Google has said is not always what's used on some of the biggest names that you would know very well. I'm not going to say them, but they're on your phone. And yes, there's a lot of other ones, but yeah, I wonder what that's going to be as far as an implication for those organizations going forward, and how that's going to affect them, and having this come out from Google saying, hey, you need to turn it around, whether or not they're going to say, okay, or if they're going to, do it right back.
Sure. So would you suggest to like apps that are, currently already have been developed, or we're currently developing them, to now make a switch and to go and use the new components and use maybe the new architecture? Do you think that's a good thing to do now, or?
So I actually inherited one of those apps that a lot of people have on their phone, and had a God object, and it weirdly used fragments that just changed out what was being displayed on the fragment. And so my recommendation to anyone who's doing that is write some espresso tests first. Honestly, I could just tell you exactly what we did to get to our architecture, and that was a lot of it, is write some espresso tests, start pulling out pieces of the functionality, and start following it on one piece at a time. So a lot of times it's easy to start with something that's low-hanging fruit, like maybe a profile screen or something along those lines, not the mission-critical pieces of your app. And start there, get a feel for the new architecture, see how it feels, and then as you get more comfortable with that, start building your way all the way to getting the whole app over there. But a lot of times there's a way to get there piece by piece, so that it's not this like whole hog sort of approach.
Anyone wants to add to that? It's fine if not.
She's doing
All right. Oh, great. Let's.
Do you want to say one? Is it a good time to ask a question or no?
Wait.
Might as well.
Hi everyone, my name is Akshay. So interesting topic on the architecture. I was also watching, and our team also has spent quite a big chunk to refactor everything to MVP, because that seemed to be, where everyone was adopting it, and then, slowly adopting the RX component on top of it, and making everything work. Now we are in terms of moving bit from RoboElectric to Espresso, but that's a different story. So now this architecture is out. It's like, why did we do this? And then, so is it, do you feel that Google is going to be enforcing it pretty soon? Certain things it's like basically we have to, if your app is at scale, right? And, business is very much dependent on it. It's very hard to tell business that, we need to start refactoring this and that because, Google is saying so. It's like, this works, so why do you want to do it? So just your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so in my last company, we actually went through a phase where we refactored like 3 times, one time from like MVP to like MVVM and then to something else. And then every time it would just end up being like 2 to 3 months of refactoring and end-to-end refactoring again. So I think it would have helped our team at least if we just refactored what we thought was hard to work with when we had to work with something. So if like code becomes really tangly and messy and you're like, I'd rather rewrite this, then I feel like that would have been a good time for us to refactor it as opposed to spending like too long on one of those screens that nobody will really end up seeing anyway.
This is what your 20% time is for. I'm going to give you the managery answer, right? Honestly, if you aren't somebody who's, spending your time doing everything you can to make what you do better, or every spare work moment, right? You're at work. And we're not talking about going home, and you could. I would be very appreciative, but that's not my expectation. But really, it's nice that they finally just, 7, 8 years later, that they're finally like, oh, this is the official way. And what's interesting is even within a lot of their own applications, you'll see that Gmail has a totally different structure to some of the applications that they distribute as part of AOSP. And last time I checked, and it's been a little while. I haven't ripped stuff apart for a little bit, but. There's a number of things. And also think about this. Google's constantly refactoring their code. You can see it. So it's not a bad thing to constantly refactor, because guess what? Every time you refactor, you remember and learn how that code was set up in the first place, even if you didn't write it. You have to learn it, understand it, which means that odds are you learned the business logic. And cycle times for developers are, somebody sticks around for a couple of years. Code sticks around for longer than that. And so having more people see that code, understand how it was originally put together, understand the business logic, so that if somebody else leaves, it's a fantastic resource. So keep refactoring your code. It's going to lead to a better product overall. It's not a one-time thing. It's a continuous evolution.
There was a question back there too.
Oh, I just have a comment. I actually asked Googler this precise question. Aren't you going to tell us what to do? Like, let Python the hard way, do this, And then he said that, oh no, we are going to be as hands-off as we could, because we are not going to tell you what to do, because we want you to explore and then to be creative. That is their philosophy. They are not going to tell anyone that you have to do X, Y, and Z. They say that this was the exact words they used. We tend to be hands-off. I think they don't want the responsibility of someone say that, well, Google said this, so they have this hands-off attitude. That's what they told me when I asked the exact question today.
Is anybody a parent in this room? When you see your children, do you not look at them and say, I want you to be creative, explore the world, and then they try to do something that's really messed up and you have to go back and be like, hey, no, and pull them back? I think that's really the case that we're dealing with here. Android is their baby. Their baby has grown up. Their baby is 7, 8 years old now and is exploring things and understanding the world. And now that baby is starting to make mistakes because now he understands things, and so he's becoming an actual person and now trying things for the first time, or he thinks he really is good at baseball and is going to be a professional baseball player. I mean, there's a number of things to remember here, but ultimately, and this analogy went way too far, but really, you know, I think it's a case of they need to pull it in. They need to do that in order to maintain compatibility with their own stuff going forward, because if they are building components that are going to be need to be tied into specific places like instant apps, then they need to be able to ensure that that is going to be the case.
And also, I think that's a good thing that the suggestions, and it's not like guidelines that you have to follow, it's just some suggestions. I love it that they come with some technical like components that can help us to do it. That's not something that came out of the blue, and we're just changing the way that we're just writing the regular code that we used to write up until now. We have some new tools that we can use. So with that, what do you think about the new architectural components? What do you think about Room? What do you think about the observables, the live data, the view models?
So it actually leads up to what I was going to talk about a little bit, because I feel like that's exactly what Google did. Is I recognized that we were struggling in this areas. We needed maybe some boundaries and some support, because the life cycle, that's all really about dealing with the problems that every single Android developer deals with. You know, we deal with lifecycle with the activity. I was talking to a developer about how fragments, you know, and fragments are kind of like that, but when they're set up correctly, they work great, and they're a great way to modularize your code. But they're complicated and hard, and so I feel like that's what they're trying to do. I love the view model provider. That's one of the things that at the agency I've been working at, we really struggled with, is trying to deal with Dagger 2 and dependency injection, and making sure that our presenters, because that particular project was an MVP model, our framework, and so the presenters were getting, of course, destroyed, and we didn't want that, and we're trying to use Dagger 2 and the scoping, and you know, it's a hassle. And so I really appreciated that they put that sort of thought into it, and that they were looking for specific problems that so many people were having in the Android space.
Yeah, I think I would agree, especially about the life cycle management. I think it's been really helpful to understand how it works, but then sometimes you feel like you're just really in the trenches dealing with and working with that. And just, I think a lot of the announcements overall were about making things easier, like removing boilerplate and just letting you focus really on the features of your app and your users, and less on really tedious things.
I agree.
Yeah, I think you summed it up pretty well.
All right, so I want to talk about maybe another announcement, which was really big one. And I bet you can guess what I'm talking about, and it was the support of Kotlin. Yeah, I can see some reactions about that. So,
on Twitter, I posted the instant. On Twitter, I posted the instant that this came up, and I actually had a single tear of joy streaming down my face. And my friend turned to me and he's like, "Are you crying?" And I'm like, "Yes." And so he took a picture. So he's like, "You need to post this."
Okay, so I want to explain why. I mean, why was this such a big news? We can talk about maybe Kotlin as just a syntactic sugar.
Yeah, well,
maybe.
I think I'm actually on the other end of the spectrum, where I was a little skeptical about Kotlin for a really long time, because I've heard stories about Scala and how that was really popular, and then just kind of died off because there was no support for it. So I was really skeptical about Kotlin, and to me it just seemed like a lot of syntax sugar, where it would make things a lot easier to read. And I was talking to some engineers, and they're like, "Yeah, but do you really spend that much time reading and writing code isn't most of your time like thinking about it. but then, so I started reading, so I think the team that developed Kotlin came up with a book recently called Kotlin in Action. And reading through it actually gave me a better understanding of what exactly the language has to offer. So I haven't actually developed in Kotlin or put any Kotlin code in production, but the fact that Google now supports it gives me a lot more motivation to do that.
So my personal Kotlin addiction, not my professional Kotlin addiction, happened after going to Andev 360 last year and presenting, and basically having like every fanboy and girl that was also like presenting and things like that, and about Kotlin. And that was about the time, a month or so into the 1.0 release. And then, of course, Kotlin in Action. I cannot believe that we had all these people and we had this new thing come out with Kotlin, that they did not give this book out for free. This should have been the ebook that was given out to every single Android developer code. Like, that. You know what, honestly, I appreciate your $700 in cloud credit. But, you know, if you could give me, like, a code for this $20 book, I would be just as happy. I actually already got it because I got it the week that it came out, but it really, first-class citizen support for it. There was always a little bit of issues with some of the Gradle dependencies and build dependencies, especially because basically I work for a company where I have several hundred build products off of a single Gradle system. So that's a very complicated Gradle setup. It means that we have to be very specific in what we take in, and that means that Kotlin was not going to be on the table because of compatibility issues and just not knowing whether support is going to go forward. But yeah, it gets rid of a lot of your boilerplate code. I wouldn't necessarily say that it's something I would suggest for somebody who is just starting out in Android, because Stack Overflow is not full of Kotlin examples like it is for Android Java. And while documentation exists and while books exist, we just haven't built up the resources well enough for that to be something that I would suggest to anybody who doesn't have at least, I would say, a year or two of experience in writing Android. And then also you get to understand the architecture and the code and how everything's put together. You should really understand that stuff before you start exploring some of the more advanced topics.
I was kind of in the same space as you, Caren, where I was excited, it like legitimized my interest in Kotlin, but I also was skeptical, I said this to my teammates as well, I was like, is this one of those like JavaScript hipster things, or like, is it actually gonna become something that we wanna use? And yeah, I would also agree with you that there's like not a lot of support or like Stack Overflow posts about it, and I'm like totally blanking on what I was gonna say. Totally. And I think I still have like a little bit of that skepticism where, I know that full Kotlin Android apps exist, but I just can't like see them in my mind's eye. And so I'm not even sure that I can imagine like our app completely converting to that, but I think it'll be really exciting to adopt it. And then like you said, like get rid of a lot of the boilerplate stuff where we can, so we can focus on like the more difficult things.
So I kind of got on the Kotlin bandwagon about 9 months ago. So for me, the announcement was like, yay, but kind of like, I'm already doing that. But not a lot. And so like, because I'm not like 100% comfortable with Kotlin yet, but some things that I found were super, super valuable were the data classes. So if you do nothing else, like look up data classes on Kotlin, and they showed that in a couple of the talks, and I'm sure there's going to be a couple tomorrow. But essentially in one line of code, you can set up a POJO that has getters and setters and toString and equals and hash code and the whole thing. I do it a lot with like JSON parsing. So you can do like the serialized name and all that sort of stuff in there. And it's really slim, which I like that a lot. Like that's the boilerplate code. And that's about the level I've gone to with actually producing to production, because I'm still not super comfortable. But I would recommend that there's a couple Cohen's out in GitHub, but whichever one starred the most, I can't remember which one that is, use that one. It's really great. I did it like 3 times. So what it is essentially TDD Kotlin. And there's a bunch of tests out there, and it's like essentially make the test pass, and you will learn Kotlin. And it directs you to the documentation. And I found that really helpful to at least give a better understanding of where I should be going. And now I'll probably start trying to push this into production a little bit more than just the data classes. So.
Okay, so we said that this is not for a beginner to go ahead and start and learn. Would you say this is like the new go-to, like the new thing you want to learn as a advanced developer?
I would think so. I mean, I feel like if you're brand new to Java, as an Android developer, learn Java, because everything Stacy said, it was 100% accurate. Like Stack Overflow and GIS and GitHub libraries, all that stuff is written in Java right now. And if you don't know Java, you're going to have a really tough time. But if you already feel pretty confident in Java, or maybe like C#, a related language of some sort, then go ahead and learn Kotlin. I think at this point, it's an easy language. And I'll do one other like spin for it, which is if you're on a team where you support iOS and Android, and your iOS team is writing in Swift, the syntax for Kotlin and Swift are really, really similar. And so I found I actually learned Swift first to help an iOS team I was supporting. And so then when I learned Kotlin, I was like, wow, it was a really natural transition.
Speaking of iOS, I've heard that there are some apps that are written in Kotlin that use libgdk to like run their app on iOS as well. So I mean, that's like literally as much as I know about it, but it sounds like something interesting to explore if you want to have like an application that's cross. But I think everyone here works on something that's like a lot bigger scale, so I'm not, rather than like games and stuff like that. So I don't know that it's something people want to go into.
Yeah, on just like where you were saying, like honestly, if you don't have the resources to do a fully native app, you shouldn't just be using Kotlin to try and generate native code for another thing. Honestly, do a progressive web app or something like that. Web performance is getting better and better all the time. Yeah, I know JavaScript now. I didn't a couple of years ago. I'm not great, but I can build something. But the thing is you know, you always need to balance your budgets, and then it's a lot easier to take a lot of JavaScript components and progressive web components and actually translate them into fully native as you can, than perhaps trying to build a single native Kotlin application and split it between two platforms. There's a lot more that you can do with componentization, especially with Polymer and things like that. But this is an Android talk, so I'm going to hand it over.
Yeah, I don't know if this was already mentioned, but I remember them saying, like, in the new Android Studio, when you copy and paste Java code,
Right.
it becomes Kotlin code like magic.
Yes.
Which sounds really cool. And even if you don't update to Android Studio, there's a button that can convert all your Java code to Kotlin code, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's probably where I'm going to start.
We got to test that, though. We got to test that at scale. What's a ridiculously large open source app? And then let's see if we can run this test. Convert the whole thing, see if it still runs like correctly.
I think just wanted to add to her is that I think the support's gonna come in Android 3.0, Android Studio 3.0, I believe. And yeah, I was also being skeptical when they showed that, okay, I can convert to this. How would you convert a set of animations, chains of animations that are running up? How would you convert, when I am speaking with like my data layer and all that stuff?
When you see something too smooth, like it's magic. I mean, we've all been to a magic show or seen somebody like Penn and Teller, and then they show you, and it's like, in fact, something complicated. There wasn't magic, but we're always skeptical, right? Like, do I still have my wallet? I mean, so I'm hoping for the best, though, aren't you? I mean, I think we all are. Yeah. I believe.
Like you mentioned that you guys have an RX layer as well in your app, and so do we. Like, I can't imagine how that would get converted over. I know there's like RX Kotlin. Do you have to have that, and then the magic happens? Or, yeah, I'm really curious to see how that would happen. You gotta trust the magic, yeah. Like all your observables are just destroyed.
Amazing. Any questions? I thought there was something more. Okay, cool. We talked a little bit before about we mentioned the instant apps, and what is its implication for our current app, and whether we should now adjust our app to be built that way that can support that. Wondering, what do you think about that? About the instant apps? About is that something that we should now go ahead and start supporting in our apps?
Yeah, it's a good question. I was really intrigued by them last year when they were announced, and then not a lot came of it right away. It looks like just like the little bit of talks, like the big talks, I think were happening while we were in transit here to explain how to do instant apps. But it looks like you have to modularize your whole code base, which is really good practice. It looks like there's a bit of tooling that's provided from Android Studio now to kind of identify what needs to be moved in to make a module. So that's helpful. But I'm also curious that on like large apps, like how successful that will be out of the box. But I think it's something to look into for sure, especially if you're doing like a retail. It seems like a lot of emphasis on retail, consumer apps, that sort of thing. Maybe like sharing product with a spouse and then being able to purchase a thing, that sort of stuff. So I think it's worth looking into.
Yeah, I think the concept is really cool. I think it's also good for like getting more things on Android. So like, let's say if somebody, like a company or a product like doesn't have a lot of like developer resources, they can do something like a light version of like their web or something like that, and just getting more people to develop for Android and get that community to grow.
So I think that eventually they want, I'm always interested in this because Google confuses me as a company because they build things like progressive web apps. They build some of these really great web development into almost native kind of look and feel. And then they come out with things to specifically designed to kill all of that. So when we're talking about a native experience, especially when it comes to retail, it makes all the difference, and I think we best saw that in the, ironically enough, the Google Assistant model, where they were talking about going through that. I can imagine that you can do a lot with actually pushing in instant app pages with the Google Assistant as part of that transactional model to show more details and product views and things like that. Although they didn't show it in there, it's what immediately came to my mind. Now, we've said retail, but I think that there's a lot with personal applications and things like that. So when we're looking at, so like Ideal in FinTech, you would probably want to know, hey, what's my account balance? And when we are talking about some of these instant apps that maybe do have personally identifiable information, what can and can we not display, and how much regulatory stuff are we going to have to deal with in order to make that happen? So the obvious implications was retail, but I think that there are a lot of other applications that maybe we don't instantly think about.
Yeah, so I actually haven't thought much about this because I build an oven mostly, so instant apps isn't very applicable. But I think one of the things that I find the most annoying is when I go on Google searches and I click on a Quora question, and it always asks me if I want to install the app, and I go, no, I don't want to install the app, I just want to see this. So I can see that being very useful for instances where companies keep asking you to install their app.
And Tapatalk. Forums.
I wonder what effect that would have on downloads then, right? If like people gauge their metrics like on like how many downloads they have and stuff like that, if people are just going to stop downloading apps.
Yeah, it's interesting that like they did show like, I don't know, maybe 20 plus different instant apps out there, and they, you know, I never know where all the data comes from in their analysis, but they said that the downloads are actually increasing a lot with the instant apps, which I could definitely see. You know, when I was working on a retail app before, one of the things is to share a product with somebody, a spouse, mom, I don't know. And I could totally see how that would get somebody into the app in a very quick, easy way, and then you can install the real app after that. So especially if your instant app experience is really slick and something that's engaging, that could definitely drive mobile downloads. And historically, once people have the app on their phone, they get the push notifications, and they're more likely to purchase your product or whatever it is you're looking for, eyeballs and that sort of thing.
I'm more curious about where they said on the 20 teams that they had, that it said 4 to 6 weeks for a team to convert. How big is the team? How talented were these teams? You based it off of 20. That's a really low number of teams. And 4 to 6 weeks. I mean, when you're thinking about this from a product management standpoint and product development, how much money do you have to generate in order to allocate 4 to 6 weeks of development time towards that effort? It's not small. It's not insignificant. And I guess this is almost part of that. Make sure your architecture and this is idealized situations, because I can't imagine that if you had to do a full refactor, that it would still be 4 to 6 weeks. So I think the 20 teams that they're identifying already pretty much followed the models that they were showing. So it may be substantially larger if you're not one of those people who already followed that. So.
Okay. So, have another question for you. I'd really like to hear your thoughts. Well, we have been talking about machine learning for some time now. It's not a new thing that we're talking about, obviously, but this I feel that this was something that was really highlighted in comparison to other events, to other highlights, and there was actually a big slide on the keynote that said that we're going from a mobile world to an AI world. It's really interesting for me to think, to hear from you. What do you think about that in the meaning of what is the implication for you as mobile developer? Are there like new things that you put on your list now to do before, to do after, to put on the side? Do you think maybe differently maybe about your application, about the development?
Yeah, so I haven't really done any machine learning. Most of the things that I've done are more UI focused. But I did go to one of the Google Assistant talks, and I was just totally hooked right away. Just like, they have a kit now that you can set up your own mobile assistant with a Raspberry Pi and a little button, and I'm totally ordering that and figuring it out. But from like a mobile app perspective, I'm really curious to see how, now that the SDK is open source, what we can use that in an app. You know, for a long time I've had product managers be like, oh, we want to do voice control stuff, and we're like, that's really hard. And are you sure you want to spend your money there? And now it's actually something I feel like maybe we can say yes to. Like, sure, we can do those things. And we'll see how it works in practice, but it sounds kind of exciting to me.
I'm the same. Machine learning is like a pretty new area to me. And again, funnily enough, like in the past couple of weeks, my teammates and I were like, maybe we should take a class on this. So I feel like we're making good choices lately. But really, I've always thought about it in the realm of like data science. So like we do use it like with our app for like analyzing like metrics and like usage and like what our crash rate is and like what that means and stuff like that. But yeah, beyond that, I can't really think of any, like, that sounds like a really cool application you said. We have like an enterprise like social app, so like the only thing that we've come up with, which is pretty much a joke, is like having an AI that when you're out of the office, like responds to messages for you when people like tag you or something in a post, especially if it's like conversations, like we have an Android group like about like questions that we have about things. It's like the bot just like responds for you. It's like, based on the past things Nicolette has said about this, like she would say this. But yeah, beyond that, I think it's a really cool area for sure, and I like that it can have so many different applications.
So I'm probably one of those people that'll talk a little too much. So first off, TensorFlow is a really powerful machine learning, essentially, language. If you've done anything with R, if you've actually, and maybe going back to college for some of you, designed a complete machine learning algorithms and things like that in C, then this is like, oh my God, I wrote 3 lines of code and like it produced a thing. Training also being a major thing brought up, especially from a custom embedded hardware standpoint. That's going to be huge. I mean, think about what ASIC miners did for Bitcoin. Now think about what that actually will do in terms of TensorFlow plot and TensorFlow processing. Now, we aren't really talking about what that means as much in terms of the application until we actually get a better look at what TensorFlow Lite is going to allow us to do. So my experience is more on the back-end side. So I'm actually looking at doing larger things with analytic categorization and automatic democratization of demographics and things specific to the way that users are interacting, because each of my clients is totally different. And so their user base is totally different, and how they want to actually move those people around, I need to make those models very flexible and abstracted from what my application is actually doing. And that allows me to do so while tying into things like Firebase analytics, as well as Firebase databasing and push notifications. So you can make this really cool connected ecosystem. And that's very big picture, but when I think about TensorFlow Lite, and especially something like a retail application, being able to make best choices and inferences actually on the device, rather than having to make a query in order to bring up those options, rather than necessarily always having to know that much about your user and the things that they have chosen in the past, being able to make better inferred choices, and then also be able to communicate that back. That's very powerful when you think about it, and especially when we're talking about photo applications, and being able to do some of that natively without having to have a connection is going to bring TensorFlow and artificial intelligence and machine learning to a much larger group. And we're not talking about the United States. We're talking about places like India, where connectivity is not necessarily a given, where electricity is not necessarily a given. That's going to really expand what that impact is worldwide.
Yeah, that was really great. But I myself don't know much about machine learning at all, but we do have a machine learning team at the company I work at, since our oven is smart, so it can recognize what kind of food you put in based on computer vision and machine learning. And it always seems so intimidating to me, because they would talk about these algorithms and methods of determining what kind of food you put in. So it didn't seem approachable, but what I thought was really inspiring in the keynote was they talked about the high school student who was able to pick up TensorFlow and help detect breast cancer very easily, which was very inspiring for me, because it made me feel like maybe I could pick this up very easily as well.
And my side promo. My husband has done a bunch of presentations and code labs and things like this on not just TensorFlow, but other artificial language stuff and getting. His name is Stephen Wiley. It's not the same last name, but you can look it up. A lot of code samples to get started.
Okay, I'd love for any questions from the audience about anything related.
Yeah, I have a question. This is one I'm just dying to hear the answer from you guys. So
Big expectations.
right. So Android is old now. I mean, it's not a baby anymore. And it's going to die soon. How is it going to die? What does Android look like in 5 years? Is it dead, or is it someplace else? Is something replaced it in phones? What does the future of Android look like?
Stacy, I'm dying to hear what you're going to say.
You can tell I spend a lot of time thinking about ridiculous things. But honestly, I think you're going to see something like what we have with Magenta project, where there's a microkernel architecture for better dynamic loading. It's also something that by switching to a microkernel, you're going to see a lot more support packages, vendor distributions, a variety of phones that require very little for them to actually do. So if anybody here has ever worked in embedded, you can get these things from Qualcomm, Samsung, their Exynos platform, and you get this board support package, and you get software that can be anything from software and firmware that can be anything from a alpha to beta quality ready, and depending on how big their distribution of chipsets, that kind of dictates how stable the code that you get is for it. That's a real problem. They've identified it, and they know that in the future they have to get rid of that, and that's why they decided that as far as Android O goes, that they completely changed the operating system architecture in order to make it a lot easier for vendors to do their custom devices. Because when we look at like the latest LG, Samsung, HTC devices, they are all pretty much using the same core. They're using the same memory for the most part. They're using a lot of the same parts, but yet we want to buy one over the other, and it's because of what that vendor actually provides. So in the future, I think they're going to really minimize what it actually means as far as an operating system goes. And I think you will maybe see some things, not just with the runtime, but some more core things in the way that the code is actually orchestrated and run, not as part of the VM, because we are starting to see some of the limitations inherent in that, right? So. Yeah, and I'm talking about it from a very deep standpoint, but maybe some other people have.
So you're saying phones?
I'm not saying phones. I'm saying from a what will it mean when we're writing applications, and how will it run? You're going to see it. It's going to be distributed far and wide, but I think that they will eventually migrate away from the Linux kernel. Because of the Linux kernel was not necessarily designed to run on tiny things and big things. It was designed primarily for a desktop and server architecture. And as we've seen, the Linux kernel has gotten bigger and bigger with a lot of components and things that are still used that you yourself will never have on your phone, never have a use for on your phone, and aren't necessarily something that they can kick out based off of the configuration that they put in unless they're really, really diligent, but nobody is. So it's going to make a lot more sense for them to go with something much smaller, much lighter, much more portable going forward, and maybe even completely change how the actual operating system works, not necessarily what our code actually does, or the code that we write. I think that would be a lot harder for them to do. So, very big picture, weird thing. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead. Oh. Do you want to go, Caren?
Sure.
Yeah.
Do it. Yeah. Well, this isn't a very sophisticated answer, but I don't know if you guys have seen the movie Her, where all he does is wear a machine in his ear. So that when you talked about lightweight stuff, that's kind of what I thought about. Maybe like we're just going to be talking to the machine in our ear all the time, and it'll just be doing everything for us.
Actually, I was gonna say, but I thought you might bring it up since you work in like the smart and like IoT area. As I was gonna say, I can see it really becoming like even more pervasive in like applications like that, and maybe nobody will have mobile phones anymore, and they will just have things telling them what to do, and like everything that we interact with, like every machine that we interact with, rather than using our mobile phones, we get our needs from like those machines.
Yeah, I am about the same, like just seeing their focus on IoT and with Google Assistant and those sorts of things. Like I think they're looking at making it really voice activated. I think even with how, even last year with Google Home when they came out, that all the Google Homes will talk to each other, and they'll talk to all your Chromecasts, and they'll talk to your phone, you know. I think we're going to end up in a world where maybe we still have mobile phones because there's still situations where we're out in natural world and there's not other devices and we'll want something to interact with. But I think we'll see this really fluid experience that as I walk into my home, everything will just work the way I want to. I'll just talk out loud. All the things that we've seen in the movies, I think will probably come into a reality at this point. And maybe we'll get tricorders.
Hopefully we won't get Blade Runner.
Yeah.
Thank you. Some more questions?
What do you think, Britt?
Yeah. Tell us.
Thing is, I really loved your answer. I think that this is actually something that we're going for, to have Android actually everywhere, to have it in many shapes. This is actually why I think that as developers, I'm going to take my answer there, that as developers, the most important thing for us to understand is actually go deep and understand the system and how does the system works, because I think many things about the system would actually still stay the same through all of the different devices, through all of the different phases and ways that we can have our application, different application on. This is the reason it's very important to understand how does thing work, like internally. This is what I think makes a developer a good or an excellent developer, or the one that would be actually in 5 years would actually be, still a useful, a great one. I don't know how to call it, because the world is changing really, really, really fast. So we need to know what's the most important things. So this is actually a really good question for you guys. What do you think? For now new developers, what would you send them to learn, or what is the things that are most important to know best?
I didn't have an answer.
I'm sorry, everyone's shocked. I didn't mean that.
Well, just as an Android developer, I always found it really hard to figure out memories were leaking and what's going on with performance. And I feel like they really concentrated a lot on that this year with all the talks they did on systrace and memcache and all that stuff. So yeah, if anybody is looking for good resources on that, there's a lot of good talks this year on that. So I thought that was really, really helpful, and stuff that has never been talked about before too.
So what do I think somebody needs to look at who's just starting out? Honestly, Udacity has amazing, amazing courses. I taught a thing of study jams and Android study jams, and it was dead simple. And I had people that had absolutely no coding experience. And now I do think they need to have a few little pre-sessions. They did have one which was like intro to object-oriented programming, but I think you really need to have an even further introductory course in terms of really having a good basis of logic, and I think maybe even a couple hours on full architecture of what you're doing. So like, this is a computer chip. It's made of this, and this is what it does, and then this is what machine code does on this, and then this is what assembly looks like, and then higher order things. I don't think it needs to be a full day, but I think that even just having that understanding is something that I find that anybody who can write good C code, and even took an assembly class or built something at some point, has that little just extra, like when it comes to actually building large-scale applications. And so I would say that you don't have to be an expert in it. I haven't written that stuff in a very long time, and never professionally, but I think it is one of those things that you should really understand that. Then you can start to learn Android programming and so logic, then architecture, then object-oriented programming, then learn Android as far as like a full Udacity coursework. And that's my feeling on it, at least.
Yeah, I can vouch for the Udacity because I actually did that course, and then I got it. Now I have a job as an Android developer. But I agree with you about like the sequence of learning. I have a computer science background and I actually TA'd some classes, and what I would always notice was the computer engineers in the class, like those majors, were always killing it because they had a really good understanding of like logic and architecture, whereas some of the computer science students, maybe they were a little lazy, but didn't really want to go that deep and were a lot more theoretical. So I definitely agree with that. And what you said about systrace, I was so excited for that because I was like, oh my God, I don't have to have Charles open while I like watch this and then see what's happening here. So it's definitely really helpful. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I just had a question about what do you think Google is doing to encourage younger developers to start developing for Android instead of going over to iOS, which is what most of them are doing? Like even if you go around to meetups, you don't see a lot of young people anymore. It's mostly everyone's focused on iOS. iOS is offering more stability, easier to learn. So I still think that Google has challenges when it comes to that department. Like, people are not really coming to Android to develop. We just not, and women too are not doing it.
Really?
No. Especially,
Interesting.
especially in the US. I feel like in other countries, they have a more robust development ecosystem as far as Android is concerned. But like in the Valley, in Silicon Valley, like around the US, it's not like that. It's mostly people are developing for iOS and Apple. So I don't know what they're doing to change that.
That's a good question. So I have a different perspective on that because when I started out with Android, the tooling was really poor. Like it was still Eclipse, which is terrible. I was a Java developer before then, and so I already was in love with IntelliJ. And then when I was told I had to use Eclipse again, I was very sad. and then I looked at my iOS counterparts, and they had this Xcode thing and this interface builder. And I'm like, why don't I have all of that? That looks great. But I feel like Apple kind of stalled a little bit in the tooling, and Android has taken off. You know, I feel like every year what they announce for Android Studio, and even like the incremental releases in between, just make Android a more an easier place to develop, I think, just because I feel like there's so much more visibility and like the network tracing, you know, having Charles and doing the layout and investigations and all that sort of stuff just really helps so much. But there is a bit of I don't know, there's still this kind of thought that iOS development is easier. There's less fragmentation and those sorts of things, but I really feel like Google's been trying to address that through the support library and through the tooling itself.
As for like the efforts that Google is making, I am aware of one thing that they have, which it's like an online course that they also do in person in like certain regions, and it's called Computer Science with Android. And I only know about this because I keep in touch with people from my college. So there's also the advantage that a lot of universities teach most of the core curriculum in Java. Definitely not everyone. So people have that background already, and then they can sign up for that course. It's free. There's a lot of support, like you said, support and tooling, but also support online. Because if you're a really good Java developer, it's kind of like just a little jump over to Android. Whereas I don't even know where you would begin with iOS.
I disagree. My youngest students to complete the course had some of the best apps. They were 9 and 12 years old.
Yeah, I remember when I first started trying to run my first Android app on my computer, and the emulator was like literally terrible in 2012 or 2011. So I think Google's trying really hard to make things easier to start developing. And this year, they focus a lot less on new Android features and more on better developer tools and better ways for developers to develop. So I think that's something that they're really trying to improve, which is nice.
Going back to Kotlin, I've been to one of the meetup and been told that, I'm not sure if this still holds true, that you can run Kotlin and Java side by side. So I just wanted to know if any one of you has the experience, and like if that can be done, what is the best approach, or what is a decent approach to go for that direction?
Pojo it out, man. Like Pojo it out. And then that's a good place to start, I mean, in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't have any experience in it, but I do want to say that that was one of those things that when I read it, I was like, there's no way that's true. It's way too good to be true.
I can say it's true. So yeah, I mean, it's very similar to, actually it's better than like the Swift Objective-C thing because you have that weird bridging and I don't know, it's bizarre. But because Kotlin compiles down to the same bytecode as Java does, then it really is, like you can use them together. That you lose a few things that I do want to like highlight. So if you do the POJO, and which is wonderful, but you don't get some of the benefits around like some of the null pointer safety and some of that sort of stuff until you're actually calling it from Kotlin itself. At least that's what I found. And so I would be just a little bit cautious around some of that. But you'll discover that and the IDE warns you. So like I assumed something would be null safe because I told it to be null safe and in my Kotlin. And then when I get to the Java side, I was getting those yellow warnings from my Android Studio that I always pay attention to. And that would be my recommendation to anyone starting Android. Don't ignore the yellow warnings. Like just as important as the red warnings. But yeah, it does work. There's little caveats, but it's not too bad.
I think we have time for one more.
I have one question, but before that, like adding a comment to like machine learning on the mobile, like because I come from a different region, like I'm currently based out of Dubai, like my name is Rishabh, like we also like it also benefit us a lot, like having the machine learning because users, especially in the Middle East, are not very open of having their data going to the cloud, especially enterprises. So it's a very major component. For example, we also do speech to text in our platform in my startup, and enterprises like Emirates or any other big company, they're not comfortable in the data leaving the device or the company like network and going to a third-party network. And so that's something which is like very helpful from the IO, which we'll find. So that was comment side. And from the question side, I have like Android, it's taking the lead, and especially with so many new good devices, like even with Samsung and stuff, and iOS is stalling. But what about the cross-platform apps and other things which are taking up and like getting popular? For example, Xamarin and progressive apps, they're becoming popular. Xamarin is native, people are saying. So how do you see like native Android development like competing with that?
I can't say I have a ton of experience with that because I'm usually the developer says go native, but or do more like a progressive web app if you want to do something like that. So I don't have a lot to say.
Me neither, and Xamarin is upstairs of where I work.
Xamarin, are you okay with doing things 3 to 6 months behind everybody else? Are you okay with having to potentially deal with something not going right in the future? The thing is that, you know, when you write Android code and you write it natively, you are getting a stamped guarantee that that thing is going to work and that you're going to have support for it. It's going to continue to work, and there's going to be somebody else who's responsible if it doesn't. And that person isn't necessarily you. And yes, and Xamarin provides a really good package. In fact, though, a lot of things that they do provide, because C# was originally called Java++, right? If I remember correctly. There are a lot of things that if you are somebody who writes C# code, you should be able to learn Java code in a relatively short amount of time. Now, granted, you are not going to be able to take a lot of your business logic, which is why a lot of people go with Xamarin, and directly port it over to an Android application. If you're somebody who's low on developers, or if you have a lot of code that's already existing in C#, I totally understand that. And you know what? Thank you for at least providing a native experience. But Xamarin is not something that I would say, hey, you're new, you should start writing Xamarin code if you're looking to get into native app development. There's a lot more jobs as a native Android developer than there are as a native Xamarin developer. But it has given an excellent pathway for a lot of people who are traditionally C# developers for businesses or business development companies and things like that to actually get into the mobile space, translate those skills, and make themselves instantly saleable. Because we were seeing, and Xamarin was, this holy ship that came in and made C# as relevant as it once was. So if you were somebody who that was your profession, you were instantly hireable into a totally other thing. And now those people are starting to learn native Android and iOS code, and that is fantastic. If nothing else, native all the things, bytecode all the things. So, I mean, I don't think it's necessarily wrong or bad, and Cordova with the way that it works, or otherwise known as PhoneGap for those of a certain vintage, it's, none of that is a bad thing. Though what we get is people who are writing code that shows up on their phone and has some of the highest satisfaction rates in development today, some of the highest happiness ratings. So I don't know if what their future holds because I don't work in their business, but yeah, it's all good, man. It's like, it's whatever gets you there, gets you there. Okay.
I just want to add a little bit that especially on Android, there are so many devices, so many manufacturers, so many version for the operating system. So there are so many challenges as is. If you try to do something that is like not fully native, then probably you're not gonna get the like the real native experience. So once again, if you're fine with that, there are so many ways to do that. But if you really want the native experience, then I guess you should learn Android. Really good. I guess we're out of time, right?
Can we get a